Welcome to Raise 'em Rugged, the podcast for parents wishing to raise confident, adventurous, anti-fragile children who are ready to take on life's challenges. Let's get started. Brett Rogers, thanks for coming on to the initial stages of this Raise 'em Rugged podcast, where we're trying to, raise children that can handle the challenges of the world and not want to cripple at any adversity or run to mommy with every little scrape on their knee. And I know you from sort of brief encounters and acquaintances, and I have the sense you're very much that same line. So I'll give my little intro to who you are and what I think you are, but it's probably won't do it justice. My impression, and I'm not afraid that we're probably going to have to use some foul language on an adult podcast, but you're a badass motherfucker in my impression of things. And that's just being honest is my thoughts. I'm just refreshing on some of your adventures and things you've done. And I'm like, holy, this is a badass motherfucker. So anyways, member of the Explorers Club, which I've looked up, and it's fairly stringent regulations to get into this club. It's not like every little backyard Algonquin weekend camper can say, hey, I belong in the Explorers Club. You have to have done some serious shit. Fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, similar type credentials. Some of your adventures you've been on are down, let me see if I'm going to get all these right. You've traveled the entire length of the Yukon, Mackenzie, Mississippi, and Ganges rivers, more or less homemade boats.
Yeah, the Ganges was a shorter trip. It was 10 days in a boat that we basically rented a boat that came with four guys that did not speak English. And but the other three were on vessels that we built and lived on. So in my 20s, I spent about a year of my 20s living on the water, essentially. Right. Yeah.
So the Ganges was like a wussy trip, basically.
We all got really sick, and my one buddy came home with worms. But it was more to kind of have the antithesis to what I had seen in North America, and especially in the north, and to go to one of the most densely populated places on earth and to see what it was like to be on a river. Right. So there were similarities, but there were, it was obviously very different. Yeah. So it was just something I wanted to do. And so it was 10 days on the river was definitely memorable.
Yeah. And just the cultural history of that river too must be pretty unbelievable. And then to see the state that is in must have been eye-opening as well, because you hear about it, but to see it.
Yeah. And I forget the stat now, but it's something crazy, like 7% of the world's population lives within the watershed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, I used to teach at Conestoga College when I was doing the river stuff. I've worked in different capacities in media. Recently, I've done a couple shows on Netflix and Nat Geo and Disney Plus and Discovery and History and but I never really fully committed to being defined by being one thing, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Just like you, I get ideas in my head and I like trying different things. But, and now that I'm a parent, definitely my priorities have changed. Just yesterday, I got a job offer to go to Mongolia for 2 months that required a 3-week quarantine in Shanghai in a hotel. And so, if I didn't have kids, I probably would have, done it. But because I have children, going away for 2 months is just not really what I want to be doing with, that limited amount of time that I have with them.
Yeah. So your past projects are all fairly extensive. They're not, a lot of people travel for work and they might go to a sales conference for 3 or 4 days and then they're home. Your type of travel for work has been a little different than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've been fortunate. Like when I was in university, kind of my goal was I wanted to travel and get paid for it. And that's how I kind of got into this world. It wasn't like I wanted to work in TV or media, but I went to Antarctica, South Georgia Island, through the Bering Sea, been to Baffin Island and the high Arctic. I've been to all these kind of cool spots on someone else's dime. When I think about, and especially now how hard travel is, it's like, wow, I'm glad that I did do that because, I don't even know how you do that nowadays. Even going to Thailand, it's a 2-week quarantine to go there. The Philippines, the same thing, right? So it's a much different world than, I'm 39. I turned 40 in a couple of months, but it's a much different world as I approach my 40s as it was when I approached my 20s. In the last 20 years, a lot of things have changed.
Yeah, and so longer trips and very obviously rugged trips. What is the one series is literally called 7 Days in Hell, and it is maybe quite literally like being in hell. So you're in situations. What gets you to this? And obviously, if you see any of the little videos I'm doing with my kids, we're not going through 7 days in hell, but we're going out for the afternoon on the river and we're catching crayfish and fun stuff like that. But you're putting yourself in situations where there's no one there, right? You have to be independent. You have to be able to take risk, overcome risk, deal with everything yourself in the most extreme way that most people could even fathom or imagine. And now you have kids.
Yeah.
Right. So this where I sort of get into this is that questions on this, right? So this adventure of kids compared to the adventure of that, you're from this world of what most humans would consider very extreme adventure, myself included. And now you have the adventure of being a parent, which, I've done enough difficult things in my life. And I would say that being a parent is up there. It's a whole different kind of difficulty. What's your thoughts on that? From someone who's done serious shit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've done an expedition or you go on a trip, right? And you often don't remember the best days. It's like the moments of when you're soaking wet and your food got, ruined and you're just having a horrible time. Like those are the things that you remember. I wouldn't say that parenting is necessarily that, but it's the trying moments of adversity where you're like, oh my God, is my child going to stop crying, or how do I get through this? Or you're trying to get a bunch of different things done. And, but it does make you appreciate, the moments of where you're like, wow, I'm so glad I'm a parent right now. Like, this is the best, and oftentimes, or the parallel I'm trying to draw is that like, you can't really appreciate how great something is unless, there is some level of adversity, and there's no harder job than being a parent. It's the most rewarding job in the world. You really receive no training for it. And when it's hard, it's really, really hard. Mm. And so all parents just try to do the best they can, or hopefully most parents, and see what the end result is. And
yours are, you said 2 and 4?
So my oldest just turned 5 on the weekend, and then my youngest is 3 and a bit. So, okay. They'll be separated by 1 year in school.
Yeah.
Both boys.
Yeah.
Both, exactly, for us, it was really important during all of this, craziness in the last 2 years, was to try and make them not aware of what was going on.
Not even know what's happening. Yeah.
And we were fortunate for the age that our kids were at. Like, obviously, if you have children that are 7 and 9, yeah, it's much more complicated because you already have this social network of friends, and, you might have sports or community things that you do. And now those are shut down. When, my kids were 3 and 1, right? Or, 3 and 2 when this started. So we were able to coast through it for the most part. Thankful and very fortunate that we live in the country. So even in the height of it, we could still go outside when that was essentially illegal. It's
people came over, the neighbors didn't really know.
No, yeah. And at some point, civil disobedience, right? You just gotta be like, but I know friends in the city, right? And through friends that live in Toronto that, you get caught up in, well, are you doing this? You're not doing this. And people are just so quick to judge. And I've been sheltered from that, thankfully. And my kids, are thriving and doing great. And, always giving us a run for our money. So it's, I have no complaints.
So some of your extreme moments out in the wild, when things are really, really, really nasty and really trying, weather or being hungry and things going wrong, and getting through those things and knowing that all things pass and you made it through alive. Some of the times that have been challenging with the kids, particularly in that first 3 months, which not 7 days of hell, but it's been called the 100 days of hell. Did you feel there was any preparation from your past experiences to put you in a mental spot to know that, hey, this is a temporary thing and it will pass, even if it felt like there was no end to it?
100%. It's a good question. So I always remember my dad ran the Boston Marathon when he was in his early 20s. and trained for it and ran it. And he always told me growing up as a kid, like you remember these things that, my dad said, I ran the Boston Marathon. And so whenever I came across something that was hard, I always reflected back on that. And so maybe that was part of the motivation of why, like, I was always, I did have this hunger to go out there and, go to cool places and put myself out there and really, experience life in a different capacity. And then when you have kids, it's like, okay, this is really hard right now, or, we're struggling to figure this out, but we'll figure it out. We may not figure it out right now, but, we'll figure it out, and you just got to keep moving forward and be focused on the present. And so there's a lot of parallels between, being out in the elements, you're in an uncomfortable situation, and being a parent, especially the first time you have a child.
Yeah.
It's like, I think everyone,
it's insane,
right? It's like,
it's insane. You don't know what the hell's going on.
No.
I remember times that I would be there and it's just crying and sleep deprived and emotions and all this sort of stuff, and trying to do a little psychological hack where I would picture myself already being in the future and thinking back that this was already a memory, and type of thing that seemed to work. And I haven't done extreme trips of your regard, but I've been out long enough canoe adventures in badass weather and thought something similar is like, this is already a memory. Soon I'll be warm. This is already a memory. And it's, I don't know, seemed to kind of work. It worked with the kids at one point.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, it's funny. Like last week, I was up in James Bay, and we were coming back. We had to leave at 6:30 in the morning because they were closing the dam, and our truck was on the other side of the dam, and you had to drive over it. And it was -40, and I was all bundled up. And I have snowmobile gear, but I don't have like a proper helmet. So I had like a wool toque, a balaclava, a beaver hat, goggles, and I ended up. I just peeled off the scab like for this podcast, but I got some serious frostbite on my head. Oh, no. Right, and it took me back to being in an uncomfortable situation where it was like, I know I'm sitting on the snowmobile driving for the next hour and a half, right, and it's really, really cold, but I just have to get through it, and now I look back on it, and I look back on it and I smile, and I'm like, wow, that was kind of fun, right? But when I was in the moment, like, I was so cold and I was so uncomfortable, and that's, it just took me back to being on the river, or even, like those sleepless nights when you're getting up all the time. But that's the stuff that makes life memorable anyways, right?
Back with some fondness. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it's crazy that you're compared to things that extreme, but in a way it is, because at the time it's like so intense, you can't even imagine. And what you're describing too is, I don't know any names or dates or places, but the idea of an explorer who, lost a limb and is basically crippled and had to crawl like 10 miles. And this is a true story. I just can't place any of the data on it. And people asked, how did you do it? And it was like, 1 inch at a time, right?
For sure.
That's it. You focus on that one step and that one. And it's amazing to equate that to parenting. But if you don't, then I think you can end up getting to the point, which you can see as a parent, where some parents who don't have that sense of reflection or self-control can lead to aggression, anger, abuse. Like you can totally relate with how it could go there.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not.
So assuming then you're going to keep your kids as safe as possible, make sure they're bubble wrapped, helicopter around and police every little thing they do to make sure they're safe. Or I'm assuming it's the opposite. So what are your thoughts then on, as your kids are getting to this age where they are mobile and out on their own, they're no longer what's the right amount? What do you see as the right amount of ruggedness or things to expose them to, and how quickly? You've given thought to that?
Yeah, well, like number one, and I was talking about this with someone like recently, and number one, my main hope with my kids is that, we were talking about technology, right? And how like it, it's essentially impossible to stop that, because it's integrated in our lives. But, I just said, I never grew up playing video games, and, if my kids do a little bit, everything in moderation, but my goal is that they grow up and they have a love for nature. And if they grow up and have a love for nature, then I've done my job, right? So by the time they're 20, if they actually think, hey, let's go on a canoe trip, or let's go get into mountain climbing, or let's go stand up paddleboarding, if that's what comes to their mind to go and do something fun over, hey, let's go play video games, at buddy's house, for straight, then I'll look back on the last while and be like, okay, it worked out. Like I raised good kids. So first and foremost is, if you want to ensure, in my view, that my kids have that love for nature, I need to have them exposed to nature as much as possible and engaging with it and not being afraid of it. And that's the one thing, a good buddy of mine, his niece is in Toronto, right? And she's a couple years older. And she's come out over the pandemic, or I won't call it the pandemic. I'll just call it the last 2 years. And
the thing,
we have chickens, right? So when she first came over, she was horrified of chickens, like horrified.
Yeah.
But now she comes over and she'll run in the coop and pick them up and walk around with a chicken, right? Yeah. And so my kids have always just second nature. Chickens, you chase them around. Sometimes they're a little too rough with them, but but just seeing how my kids interact with animals or being outside compared to, someone who's grown up, especially in this, this time, it's been so challenging. Like even with snakes, our friend down the street has a pool and we go swimming there and there's always snakes in the, in the pool house. Right. Yeah. And I have pictures going back to when my kids are like 1.5, like holding snakes. Right. Yeah. Having no fear.
Yeah.
Now, I teach them, there are some snakes that you don't want to pick up when you go to certain places, but, I would say so far it's about, just getting them outside, especially like when my kids were like really young. I always like made an effort and I've been able to, work. I mean, I'm either gone for a while or I'm home and I'm present. And so I was always like, we got to go outside. Like, you always have to go outside at least once a day, even if it's like -20 and it's a snowstorm. Right. It's like, or even if it's pouring rain, it's like, I don't want my kids to think that, the weather is a deterrent to like going out there. Right. And it's just like, when your kid falls and if you react in a way of like, they look at you and they start crying. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you don't react and they fall, now sometimes they actually will be hurt and they'll cry. Yeah. But if you don't react, they just look at you and then they just go on with it. So it's the same thing. Like if it's raining or really hot or snowing or whatever, it's just like, it's the weather, dress for it, let's go outside. So that's how I'm trying to raise my kids. And, it's an ongoing process. And I do find as they get older, especially my oldest, like he's less inclined to be as adventurous as he was when he was younger. Okay. He's still adventurous and like loves being outside, but like, he might be like, oh, it's too cold, I don't want to go outside. Right. It's like, no, we're going outside, and then once you get out there, it's fine. Right. So
you come back in for hot chocolate. It's all good.
Exactly.
That's a reward. You have thoughts on when they start to go on some more extended adventures?
Yeah. Like we haven't done any overnight camping or anything like that just yet, but we've done a lot, but because we live in the country, I don't necessarily need to just yet. It's like, we can go outside at nighttime if they stay up late and go and see the fireflies, or go for a walk over to the pond, with the flashlight, find the frogs, but to be honest, like it's definitely, I don't know when I'll do it, but I definitely want to do a major expedition one day with my kids, like before they're full on, like, young men. And I don't know if it's going back down the Yukon, which is a river that I love, just in terms of having that much wilderness for that long.
Yeah,
it's incredible. Or the Mississippi was equally, it was very different, but it was still it would be an amazing place to go revisit. So either one or maybe both, but I love to go do a, multi-month expedition with them, maybe when they're like, 13, 14 type of thing.
Yeah, where they can hold their own to a degree. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's like, and that's the other thing, right? It's that like kids are way more capable than we realize, and we hold them back. But you think about, how resilient children were 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and like what a 5-year-old was capable of doing, so I think by the time they're 12 and 13, as long as they have enough experience and and training, there's no reason why they wouldn't be totally capable of doing something like that.
As long as they're able to carry their weight and have some resilience to get through the weather you're going to deal with, right? And there's a whole chapter on what you've just mentioned in Lenore Skenazy's book on free range kids, just on what kids did 2 generations ago versus now. They're capable of so much more, and we don't give them credit for it. We hold them in. We want to oversee everything they do and make sure they do it just right. Generations ago, like the 10-year-olds were raising the 5-year-olds who was raising the 2-year-old because mom was with the baby.
Yeah, I know. And and like something else I think of is like my mother-in-law, right? Great woman. But she'll always, like she loves saying, be careful, right? And, or even if you're leaving, like, you just had dinner and you're getting in the car and you're leaving, be safe, be careful. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, do you think I'm going to drive 150K down the road, in the wrong lane and try and get home? Like, obviously my goal is to get home without incident. Yeah. But it's the same thing, like with a kid, doing something, my kid just, both my kids just figured out the other day that they can like walk their legs up the wall, right? And then have their hands on the ground, kind of like how you learn how to do a handstand.
Yeah.
And then, but the reaction is like, be careful, yeah. Right? And it's like, well, you know what? Like, or like we're teaching the kids to skate and it's like, you just tell them you're going to fall and it's going to hurt, right? Like that's just part of it, and I was listening to Jordan Peterson the other day, right?
How dare you?
Guy. And he was just saying, he's just like, the problem that we do is we try to like raise people in this fairy tale that, happiness is all the time. And, like, and it's like, he's like, no, living is hard.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's moments of like, utopia and things are going great. But in general, like life is a struggle. Right. And it's not an easy thing. And I think kind of coming back to what you said, that's an important thing to instill in your kids is that like, it's not always going to be easy. You're not always going to get what you want. You're not always going to be warm. You're not always, but it's something you have to work at, and, because it is easy to be like, well, like it's easier to just stay inside and not do that. But sometimes you just got to get out there.
Yeah, there's a couple neat things on what you're saying there. The whole be careful. I forget where I read this because that's your tendency to your kids, right? And be careful. And what I read, and I try to remember to do it, is instead of being careful, just ask them a question specifically about what they're doing. So say if they're climbing a tree, instead of saying being careful, say, do you think you have a good grip on that branch to be able to pull yourself up? Or if they're hopping across some slippery rocks, what's going to happen if your foot slips off that rock? Like actually make them think rather than just say be careful, because it doesn't mean anything, right? Or like you did when they're skating. Yeah. It's like, don't say be careful when they're skating. Say, hey, listen, when you fall, it might hurt your knee, Yeah. And the thing is, I think what's happened with some of this culture of safetyism is the pendulum swung so far. Like kids generations ago, people would have 10 kids because only 4 would survive, right? Like myself, before I was 14, I probably had 3 good concussions, like overnight hospital stay concussions. We didn't wear helmets on bikes. We didn't wear helmets skiing. Those are 2 that put me in the hospital, like bad state. I know I have effects from those concussions to this day, right? It's probably why I have these glasses, like quite literally, it is some brain trauma. My kids won't have that. We go skiing, they wear a helmet, and so do I. They go on a bike, they've never been on a bike with right? So some of it is needed and helpful, but I think when the pendulum has gone so far, it's doing damage to the kids, right? And those are a role to how do you set them up, right?
I think obviously it's balanced. No one wants their kid to be hurt and in pain, but it's just gone so far the other way. Like even in this whole idea that you play sports and no one wins. Yeah. And it's like, no, like the whole point of a game is to win, right? And there's losers, and and life, like I often look back on, if I was trying out for a hockey team and I didn't make it, and maybe sometimes I should have, right? And like, crying in the car, right? Yeah. And but like, I'm glad I went through those experiences. It made me tougher, and kind of going back, it gives me something to look back on and relate. And if we don't allow our kids to experience failure and defeat, then when they actually do face something later on in life, like, what happens if, like, both my wife and I died, right, in 10 years, right? Which is obviously a horrible, traumatic thing. But if they've never gone through any sense of loss and have experienced anything, it's going to be way harder to move on, like to move past than not. And that's a very extreme example, but just kind of going back to that, like, we had a rooster, we had this beautiful rooster, right? Love this rooster. He was great. But then one day he like attacked my oldest son and like pecked him in the shoulder and cut him. Now my son provoked it, right? Yeah. And that's why, like, I didn't have a rooster at the beginning, but then I was like, I kind of wanted a rooster. And I was like, okay, I'm like, like, we have a 1 strike policy, right? So I killed the rooster. Now my son wasn't literally right there, but I was 30 feet away. I put the piece of plywood down and I take the axe and I cut off its head. And then I went and I threw it in the field. And it was hilarious because, like, for the next like year, like, he would just repeat, "Daddy killed rooster," "Daddy killed rooster." But but I just feel like it's important for him to understand, through, I guess, that rule kind of upbringing that I'm trying to give my kids, like, to understand life and death, right? And that things do die, and things come to life. And, because it's like, well, when do you teach it? Like, even like, reproduction and all that type of stuff, right? When you're around animals, it's an easier way to kind of teach it, because it's like, oh, I get it, right? Rooster, hen,
what they do,
chicken, right? So
I hunt, and my boys have been exposed to seeing deer carcass from the time they were little, and understand that we take animals and we turn them into meat. And they've had full grasp of that. We have chickens currently, and we have in the past. We have one video that's on our channel now called Henny the Chicken Dog. We had this flock of chickens, and over the course of the winter, raccoons and possums picked them all off one by one, except for Henny. She survived. So she moved into our garage and then onto our front porch in a dog crate. It was a bit of a, she'd come on the deck and follow us around and beg for food like she was a little dog. But then one day there was a pile of feathers out in the grass. We think a hawk got her. So I was worried the kids were going to be like upset and sad because of Henny. And they're like, oh, that's just nature. That's just what happens. They're like, can we get a new pet now? It's like,
oh, no, that's good.
But yeah, you're exactly right. If they don't understand that sort of stuff, like, and then like you said, it's for the bigger thing that likely will never happen. But if it does, you don't want them to crumple, right? You want them to be able to handle those bigger things.
Yeah. And and again, going back to, like, it's like, I remember when my great uncle Jim died, right? And I was in grade 8 and I was playing hockey with grade 9s. And I remember that, like, emotion and being so upset. And my dad's like, you should still go to hockey. And I remember going to hockey, and then I ended up getting in a fight with this guy that was bigger than me. And I was a pretty big guy. But I remember just the emotion and all of that. And, and that was the first time I had ever experienced loss that I remember. Right. And, I was in grade 8. Right. So how old was I? Like 13, 14. And so just being so overcome by emotion and just, it's like bad things will happen. So just kind of exposing kids to, not to too much of it, but to, so they know how to kind of deal with it. Right. And no one really knows, what happens when you die. Right. It's kind of like this thing. And so, it's an answer we don't have, it's a question we don't have an answer for. And so just learning and giving the kids the tools to try and deal with it as best as possible. So it's, you're not going out there and dropping the gloves and getting in a fight in hockey, because that's the only way you know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I guess on that sort of question you brought up, I had this other sort of question for you. You spent a lot of time way out in the middle of nothing and some awe-inspiring places. On that thought of what happens after you die, has being out in those places made you think of something bigger that we're connected to, or made you think the opposite, that we're just organic meat puppets that fall into the earth and recycle. I'm sure in those times out in there, you have a lot of time to think.
Yeah. It's funny, like for whatever reason, when I was a kid, like I was a self-proclaimed atheist, like when I was in grade 3. And I grew up with a lot of, I'm not even sure why that happened. I remember my papa gave me a book on evolution, and I read it, and a lot of my friends were very religious. So I always kind of went against the grain. And so I was always very much, kind of like, like you die, you go in the dust. It's almost like as I've become older, not that I'm not religious at all, but I definitely, and spiritual is a word that's thrown around too much. But I definitely, feel like, it does kind of give me peace. Like when I think about nature in that kind of, even if it is that recycled way, and so, I don't know, like you definitely think about it. I mean, I remember being on the Yukon River, and like, honestly, after like 80 days, our biggest worry was like, cause we were starting to go crazy. Like our biggest worry was like, oh my God, like, you get lots of time, right? It's like, you imagine if an alien ship came here and took us away, right? No one would know, right? No. And like, you started thinking about these crazy scenarios, right? And like, it's not that I thought that it was going to happen, but it's like, well, like no one really knows, I don't pretend to have the answer, to, is there an afterlife? Is there not? All I know is that like nature is incredible. I can't, no one can fully understand like how incredible the natural world is. And we're just parts of that,
Mm-hmm.
And we often put humans in the middle of everything, and we think the world runs around us, and I definitely don't feel that way. So I definitely have this connection to feeling like there's more. And I would like to think that there is, but the truth is that, I don't know. So I'm not going to really worry about it.
And then, have your kids got to the point where they start asking those kind of questions already?
About death?
Yeah. And just, or they have other people
like
just in their school or whatnot that talk about church and talk about God, and then they come home. Mine definitely have. And I'm somewhat similar to yourself in my thoughts on things. I've dove a little further maybe into some more explanation as to what is consciousness and where is the root of it all and everything. And it really does kind of fall in line with the real fundamentals of all the ancient religions. They're really kind of saying the same thing. But then when the kids come with those kind of questions, it's like, it's not my upbringing, which was a Catholic upbringing, but it's what is it then that you don't have to have all the answers as a parent, but you want to maybe have something for them. Your perspective.
Yeah, well, I remember my son, he's asked a couple of times, he's like, am I going to die? And that's obviously a hard question to answer. Right. And I don't, with that one, I don't necessarily need to answer it to a 4-year-old because he's not going to understand it, but you can answer it in the sense of, well, like, everything that is born will eventually die. It's just the way life goes, right? You don't have to specifically be like, yes, you were going to die. Because the truth is that who knows, maybe in 30 years from now, there's some crazy technology, or I mean, I don't know, what I mean? Like, so, but like, I don't need to go there, like specifically with that.
Just upload your consciousness to a mainframe and, download it into a new meat suit, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Like the Matrix could very much be real.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? And just going, it's like, is this even real? Or, or are our dreams real? Or who knows? I don't know, so just try and be a good person. And you're going back to the religious point. So I was not raised at all religious, and I still am not, but I do feel that there is a void now. That religion did create, in the sense of community and people coming together and routine of like, we get together on Sunday and you help out your neighbors, and that and it's even with COVID, it's been kind of beaten down even more, and that part of it, I do wish, I wish there was like not a church, but something that was about natural law, and just the idea, when you take all these different religions, they all promote the same thing, right? Like essentially, right? And kind of taking that philosophy of like being a good person and helping other people. The one thing that I remember, is all the people that helped me from traveling, right? Like when I was traveling, complete strangers. And that's something that, I definitely try to instill in my kids, and I want to expose my kids to as many people as possible. But just, remembering how total strangers help me, when nowadays it's like a lot of people raise their children to be like, oh, yes, like, you don't want to be talking to like the weird guy that's coming up in the black van, but but it's okay to like, talk to people.
Yes.
Right. And engage, and, someone needs help, and, and showing, like, the best way to teach and instill is through doing. Right. And so, just a quick example. I remember going to university, and my dad was driving my buddy and I back after Christmas or something. And we were getting on the highway, and this is like, I don't know, 18 years ago. So, like the winter seemed a lot colder, and I was going to Waterloo, and we're getting on the highway ramp. There's a guy with a sign, like I said, Windsor. And my dad pulled over because my dad had hitchhiked when he was younger.
Yeah.
And I had hitchhiked too a bit. Sorry, I had a little bit at that time, and I've done it a few times since. He pulled over and he's like, like, do you need a ride? He's like, and so he gets in the car, and he was coming from Newfoundland. He was going to Sacramento, California. His wife had left him. He was in the hospital. He had no money. This crazy story. My dad's like, well, I can drop you off at the, the service station on the highway. And because we're going up to Waterloo, and, you could probably find a ride. And my dad gave the guy like $80, right? Yeah. And as soon as he got in the car, he fell asleep, right? Because he was exhausted. And, and I've often thought that like, that was probably like the greatest lesson my dad ever taught me.
Wow.
Because, he went out of his way in a snowstorm. It was like minus 25. His son and, like a friend are in the car, and we pick up this guy who looks like shit.
Yeah.
Right. But gives him the benefit of the doubt, gives him some cash, not enough to kind of like change his life, but enough to get to the next day.
Yeah.
And, it was just a really powerful teaching point that, like, he didn't tell me any of these things. He taught me through doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's coming back to what you're talking about is like, it's one thing to be like, yeah, I want my kids to be tough and like, and be able to take care of themselves. But if I act like a sissy, and I'm scared to go outside, they're not going to do it. But guess what? If I go out and I'm doing things, they're going to want to do it, right? Because they're going to, want to, I want to be like dad. I want to be like mom. I want to be like uncle, So, doing action matters.
Yeah.
It really does.
So it's your main things you want to teach your kid as far as values to live by become mainly the stuff that you need to live by. And there's really something amazing with kids is that they're always watching, they're always listening. And you start to think of maybe the way you were as in your youth and things that you did and ways you acted maybe even a decade before kids. And you're like, man, they put a mirror in front of you, don't they? It's like, I got something bigger. I got something bigger to live up to here now, because they're always watching and listening. And I don't want them. There's a lot of parts of me when I was younger that I don't want them to be. I want them to have a higher sense of integrity, right? Mm-hmm. So that actually changes you. And it's interesting because it's also like the phrase that you're not who you once were, and you aren't. You don't have to be who you currently are. Something along those lines, right? And it's really about actions. The thought too is like, picture the person you want to be and just start acting like that person. Like, it's so simple, but so hard. And then your kids are watching. So you list out those sort of values that you want them to live by. And then as a result, you have to really live by them and teach them through what you're doing. And that example with your dad's great.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. And like, just to kind of like, a side note with just the importance of doing, I remember when I was in grade 3, my mom rented me a National Geographic of these 4 guys that went down the Yukon River. Right. And so like I was in grade 3, and that's what kind of planted the seed of adventure. Right. And then my dad would, told me trips of going to Europe and hitchhiking in North America and everything. And, like I don't remember much of like the first 15 years. I mean, obviously I remember stories and like like I have memories, but
Yeah.
it's like, but then you have these moments where it's like, that apple drops on the head and you're like, wow, like if my mom hadn't have rented that, how different would my life have been if I was like, I'm not, if I did not go down the Mackenzie River, like I
Right.
went to Waterloo, but I thought I was going to go to Queens, and just, like, so you just don't know. And like last week when I was going to James Bay, the guy I was going up with, he's in Collingwood. So I drive up there and his son's, I think he's 8 or 9. And so when he introduced me, he's like, oh, Brett, rode down the Mississippi River for 4 months. And he was like, 4 months, right? And then when he put him to bed, like he's still thinking about it and processing it, right? He's just like, I can't believe he was on a river for 4 months, right? Because
right?
When you're young, you're trying to put time into perspective, right?
Yeah.
4 months is like a long, long time. And it just made me really smile, right? Because it was like, this innocent little introduction, but like, like you're planting these little seeds, right? And and you never know which one's going to take, so.
For sure. It's the stuff from that age. Like you said, you don't remember a lot of things from when you're that young. They're usually like the really joyous things or the traumatic things.
Yeah.
And those, like, especially the time from here's a crazy thing. Your older son now is just at the age where you start to even remember.
Yeah.
Like your younger son won't have a single memory of what's happening right now. It's shaping his life, but he won't have a single memory of it. That's so hard to get your head around as a parent.
It is.
Can you remember anything from when you're 4? No. But it's not like you're not conscious. Like you're completely there, but you're not forming long memories yet.
No, you're not. And I forget the exact science with it all, but it's like those first 5 years, right, are make and break.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
They're so incredibly important. But the irony is that you don't remember it, like you're saying. Right.
But it's forming your brain.
Exactly. So, but you're imprinting and you're shaping the person, like other than the DNA of like who they already are, the other part of it of who they will become, like you're shaping. Right. And then, so like when my son turned 5, it was like, okay, like, he's obviously still going to grow and learn and evolve, but like, we finished this phase, like you have the phase of like conception and like, like being carried inside the womb. And then it's really, and then it's really like the next 5 years, like you could say that that's a phase. And then you probably have from 5 to just before you start becoming a teenager and the hormones start kicking in. And then, and like, so it's like, wow, like that phase is done. And like, there's no going back, and it's so important. And we don't even fully understand how important it is. And we don't understand, like we know that children have been hugely impacted with all the lockdowns in the last 2 years.
We don't really see the outcome of this for a long time yet. No, there's gonna be
a long time, right?
So
maybe for our kids, no, I was just gonna kind of a joke, just like, maybe for our kids, like that's their competitive advantage is that we were able to minimize like the fuck up, and they'll end up doing really well because unfortunately so many kids are going to be totally, like
couple steps back.
Spot, unfortunately, right? It's really sad.
Yeah. The other thought on that too. So you got those phases, and then you're right, when they hit 12 to 14, it's like you're no longer their major influence. Think of yourself at 14. My parents weren't my major influence anymore. Even by 12, it's your friends. And then high school, forget it. And college. And then maybe, I have one friend I spoke to recently. I haven't spoke to him in a long time. He's a grade school friend. And he got married a fair bit younger and has, so his son is like 18, 19, 20 years old now, right? And he shared with me the importance of trying to find something that you will enjoy with your kids when they get to be that age or older. And him and his son took up hunting when his son was like 13, because he's like, I want to have something that he'll still want to do with me. And he's like, right now, that's really the only thing we do together is we go hunting together. Otherwise, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's those little seeds that you pick up from other people. And you're like, wow, because he's like, it goes fast, brother. He's like, all of a sudden, they don't want you. They want nothing to do with you. You better have a couple things. Otherwise, you're just, and then your house is empty and quiet.
Exactly. I know. I know.
Sometimes right now you think, wow, empty and quiet sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, and it's like funny, right? Because you have your house, I'm sure, like it's always a mess. You know what I mean? Like it's like you clean it up
Boys
and
are
it's a
crazy.
mess. And
Boys are crazy.
they're crazy, right? And my wife will be like, "Oh, it's a mess." And I'm like, Lynn, like before you know it, the house will be so clean, right?
Empty. Yeah.
You'll just want it to be a mess.
Yeah.
And so, just enjoy it being a mess. Like it's fine. Like who cares? Right. It's a very short time. It's man, is it ever a short time?
All of a sudden she'll be buying a poodle just to have something to cuddle in the house. It's like, no, exactly. You cannot do that. I hope you don't have a poodle.
No, we don't. No dog right now.
No dog. Yeah. Awesome, man. I can try to keep this sort of at that point, about an hour.
Sure.
Thought with these is not to go too crazy long. I'm sure we can keep talking for another hour or two. Indeed. So maybe we'll do another one.
It's great. It's great to always have that inner reflection, right? Of like just kind of reflecting on being a parent and and just realizing again how quick it goes and like what like it almost makes me think like like after this call I should go like write down on the whiteboard like what are like the key values that I do want to instill so I can like visually see them but no, it's great that you're doing this and it was a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, and it'll be cool. And just last little point, so you mentioned Yukon River trip to do with your boys. I have a printout of, I don't know who it is, two people. I found a picture online doing a trip down the Yukon River that sits above my desk and on my screensaver. And I'm 47, I'll be 50 in a few years. And I told my boys that the year I turn 50, I want to do a full out, I'll do a 10-day guided trip because they'll only be, 3 years, 9 and 11 or 10 and 12. So they'll be relatively young. But that's on the board to do with them when they get to, they'll be relatively young for a trip that big, but man, it'll shape their life. I think it'll shape mine too. So.
Oh, totally. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, you never have regrets doing those types of things, and just like, one last point, just that made me think of it is that, the whole idea of materialism and gifts and all this plastic crap. And it's like, if we put more focus on, giving experiences to our kids, and not stuff they don't really need. Yeah, you need some stuff, but I think that's a really great thing to live by because they're not going to remember, gift they got from whoever on this date, but they're going to remember, that time I did this with dad or the time I did this with, and so. But it's also
plastic and batteries.
Yeah, I know, but the story too about the dad and hunting, it's also something to think about, right? Just to be like, okay, like what do I want to be able to have that I can do with my kids later on. And it's something that kind of, I've hunted a little bit, but it's not something that I'm not a hunter.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think that they would really enjoy. And it's, it does seem like it's the ultimate father-son bond or, even father-daughter bond. Because, maybe it's this like, caveman mentality, right? Of like, let's go, work together and, and get some meat. So that's a cool idea. I like that.
There you go, man. So, okay, dude, let's be in touch. Maybe we'll do a little mini trip in the spring. I don't think I would go to James Bay and get frostbite with you, but maybe a trip down the Grand with our kids or something.
Yeah, sounds great. I love the Grand.
All right, man. Hang in there. Have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Oh, no, wait. One last thing we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Every good podcast has to end. Where do people find you? Be up to date on things you're doing, adventures you're on. Are you out? You got spots out there now?
Yeah. No, I don't really do any, I don't do any self-promotion really anymore. I'm kind of done being in front of stuff. I'm kind of more focused on behind the scenes, but yeah, I am on Instagram. I still have the Brett on the Water tag, on Instagram. So that's where I put most of my stuff with raising my kids and doing all that. So
sure.
Yeah. Behind the scenes now, man.
Behind the scenes. Just people call you up and you go on their journeys. Perfect.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, man. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Raise 'em Rugged podcast. We'll see you again next time as we continue on this parenting journey. Be sure to like, subscribe, download, and rate the show. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media outlets.